When Pastor Rob had asked me to do the sermon, he saw me counting like this on my fingers because I'm one of those people who is in the Bible in 90 Days class. We are reading cover to cover of the Bible in 90 days. And I was counting to be sure that we were going to be out of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. I said to Pastor Rob that for anybody who reads the Old Testament, you need a support group because it is so hard to read through it. And so anyway, the good news is what I get to talk about tonight. And we're going to do a couple verses out of the New Testament. Let's say a prayer first, and then we'll go into this. So, Lord, let the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth be your words and good in your sight. You are my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Many of you know my husband, Tim. Tim and I look at life a little bit differently. Do any of you all have a spouse, a significant other, or family members who are just different than you are? I can imagine so. Well, let me tell you how that plays out with Tim and me. He is the left brain one. He's the one that's logical, sequential, organized. I'm the right brain one. I'm the one that's a little more creative, artistic, and sometimes I can be a bit messy. He had asked me in our fundraising consulting business, he said, "Are you putting your tax receipts in the file I created for you?" And I'd say, "Yes, dear." And the next month he'd ask me the same thing and I'd say, "Yes, dear." So at the end of the year, I'm pulling out this big, thick folder where he's pointing to the 12 individual file folders that I should have been putting them in. See, Tim's committed to being organized, but he's also committed to saving money. He calls it value engineering. So when he books our travel reservations, I'm never sure if I'm going to be on United Airlines or a Greyhound bus. I was doing a speaking engagement in New Orleans at the convention center, and Tim went with me. He got us a hotel that, you know, it had the AAA discount, the frequent stay discount, the frequent flyer discount, and of course, the nice guy discount. And the next morning, he's off securing transportation for the 10 blocks to the convention center, and I'm up in the room getting ready. So he comes back and he looks at my skirt and he said, "You know, I like that light gray pantsuit a lot better." Now, for him, a man to comment unsolicited on what I'm wearing was an oddity in itself. But for him to actually take a stand and pick an outfit, well, as I'm smoothing out the wrinkles in my light gray pantsuit, I thought, well, maybe he really does notice what I wear. So we're heading down the stairs past the bell stand, and I hear giggles. Well, I turn around and the bellman winks at me. I didn't know what a great looking pantsuit this was. So we walk out of the front of the hotel and I'm just ready to grab a taxi and Tim says, "Not exactly." And I said, "Oh, a rental car." He said, "Not exactly." So we're heading around the edge of the hotel, and just as we're heading around the edge, I see the entire bell staff back here, pointing and snickering at our mode of transportation. A tandem bicycle, a bicycle built for two. Well, it doesn't, at first I said, now I know he's not noticing as much what I'm wearing and how I look in it as to how I will pedal in that light gray pantsuit. Well, so it doesn't take a half a block for me to realize we've got to pedal at the same pace if we're going to make this work. So here we are, slogging down Bourbon Street. I'm trying to keep my light gray pants out of the chain grease and keep my hair from frizzing in the humidity of New Orleans. And he says something to me, and I thought he said, "Pump." And so I put all my energy into pedaling or pumping that bike. But what he really said was, "Bump." So then he says something else, and I don't really hear him, but I thought he said go. And so I put all my energy into go. But what other vehicular command rhymes with go? How about slow? So I pedal him right out in front of an oncoming trolley. And you know, what we have here is a failure to communicate. But I think he says go, and I'm glad, because I'm ready to get off of this divorce machine or tandem bike, whatever you want to call it. Because see, I don't have any control. I can't steer, brake, change gears, see or hear. Now for me, somebody who likes to have control, this is very difficult for me to have to give up control. But somehow we made it to the convention center. I jump off the bike, I run in to the bathroom, check my pants for chain grease and smooth out my hair and say, a funny thing happened to me on the way to the convention center. So my experience on this tandem bike reminds me of these two passages in the New Testament that I'm going to read in just a second in Mark and Luke. It's Mark 12, 41 through 44. He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and he said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. And then the other verse is Luke 21, 1 through 4. He looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on. So the reason that my experience on a tandem bike reminds me of these passages is, who's in control? If Jesus is in control and all the kingdom of money and things belong to him, then it's like Jesus is watching people take his money and give it back to him. What would it be like to have Jesus sitting beside me and watch what I put in the offering plate of what he has given me? Ouch. As a kid, my dad would give me a quarter to put in the offering plate, and it was a really tough decision for me. See, my family always said that I had strings through my quarters because I didn't want to spend the money. So here I'm being given enough money for, back in those days, a lot of candy for a quarter. But Mom and Dad's direction was to put it in the offering plate. But see, I knew who was in control. My mother was no stranger to taking a switch off the tree and using it on me. Of course, I put the quarter in the plate because I knew I couldn't hide it. When Tim and I are on the tandem bike, it appears that he's in control. See, the front person on a tandem bike is called the captain, and the one in the rear is called the stoker. But those of you who are bikers know that a key part of successful bike riding is you have to balance, right? Now take a bike with 2 people, and what happens if one person doesn't balance? It can take the whole bike down. I have to do my part, and I have to balance and pedal. The only control I have really is I can pinch him or I can yell at him if he doesn't give me good direction or he goes too fast. So when I look at the Old Testament, people don't realize who's in control. They create false idols, they honor kings and not God. That's one of the reasons the Old Testament is so hard for me to read. Sometimes it doesn't seem that our God is a loving God because of the sacrifices and the destruction and the killing. But here's what I've learned from reading the Old Testament. It's not that God is vindictive or he takes pleasure in wiping out people and entire cities, but it's that we as people are so defiant. Instead of allowing him to be in control, we take matters in our own hands, and then God has no other choice but to discipline the people. If only they would have given him control, he would have been on the front seat of the bike. Imagine ERPC's tandem bicycle has 260 seats. There's a seat for every one of you, everyone in the church. And then think about it. We're out here on the bicycle path, and it's glorious weather. And who's driving the bike? If we're in the captain's seat on the tandem bike, we need to change places with Jesus and listen to what he's telling us. I'm here to say from firsthand experience, it's difficult to surrender all control to anyone, whether it's on a bike or it's in life. If Jesus was on the front of our tandem bike, what would our life look like? What would the life of the church look like? It would take all of us to do our part. Some of us would be pedaling harder, but we'd all be pulling our own weight in our own way. We each have to run our own race, or bike our own race, as the case may be, because we have to pedal. And at times there's going to be steep hills and mud puddles and rocks on the road, but we have to do our part. We can't just coast. Some parts of our lives we're willing to work really hard. Sometimes we're tired and we just can't pedal as hard. And other times we'll see someone else that needs us to pedal harder. But regardless, we're all on the same bike. We at ERPC are in community together. When the widow is giving her last coin, she isn't giving it alone. We're all there to support her. So, pedal point number 1, Jesus needs to be in the captain's seat, and we still need to pedal. So, back to today's Bible verses and the woman who gave so much. Every time I read this verse, I think of Gerda Hyde and the lessons she taught me. This is a photo of her. I felt honored to get to know her. She was a board member of the college in Oregon where I was executive director of the foundation. She passed away a few years ago, but she was an iconic legend in the West. See, in the 1950s, Gerda was 20 years old. She had been raised in Palo Alto, California, and she was going to the University of California, Berkeley, and she met a boy. And that boy's name was Dayton. They called him Hawk Hyde. And he moved her to this little town called Bly, Oregon. And in Bly, Oregon, there's still only 400 people who live there today. So you can imagine in 1950 how many people lived there. There was long winters and the temperature was typically below zero. She didn't even own a winter coat or a pair of boots when she moved there. She said that first winter she was just not sure she could maintain in these harsh conditions. So she and Hawk ran a 5,000-acre cattle ranch. Well, early on it was the two of them, but then he started fading in and out and he wasn't around much. And he left her with running the ranch and raising 5 kids. And when they moved there, their neighbors weren't too happy about them living there because Native American tribal lands surrounded their land. And she told me a story one time that Hawk went out and with the chief of the Native American tribe, and guns were drawn. And she said she was sure that he wouldn't come back alive. But at the end, they ended up shaking hands. And from then on out, they worked together. So as a single mother of 5 kids, she was able to make enough money to survive. But when Oregon experienced a lot of their lumber mills closing, the farm just wasn't enough to make the income. And in her advanced age, she wasn't even able to get on a horse any longer. Gerda was a faithful giver to Oregon Tech, where I was responsible for raising money. Each month, she would come in with that folded check written in her arthritic hands. And I knew her financial situation. I knew she couldn't afford it. I just wanted to tell her, no, Gerda, no. Don't give me that check. Let me just write a check for you. But here's the lesson that she taught me. If I didn't allow her to give what was in her heart, I was depriving her of the opportunity to share her gifts. I had no right to do that. I tell nonprofits that I work with when fundraisers are afraid to ask for money, what I learned from Gerda, to allow people to give what they feel led to give. Recently, one of my friend's husbands passed away, and I was helping her clean out his things, and we laughed and we cried. And then she stopped and she said, you know, Robin, a funny thing happened. She said, when he died, he didn't take his suits with him. He didn't take all of his fly fishing gear, and he certainly didn't take those little tiny containers of nails and screws in the garage. That's a lesson for all of us. We can't take it with us. We're at pedal point number 2 now. It's all Jesus' kingdom. When we give, we are giving his money to his church. This is an important Sunday in the life of our church because today was the kickoff for stewardship season, meaning that we begin praying about our gifts for the end of year giving. So Tim and I have been married for 37 years, and each year when we talk about our pledge to the church and the amount we're going to give, it seems so uncertain. A lot of life will happen in the next 365 days. Will the finances be there? We pray about it. We base it on where we are financially at the time and what we predict for the next year. But it is inevitable that some income that we had counted on doesn't come in, or unexpected financial situation arises. And it's far from being all bunnies and bows and roses. But interestingly, on December 31st of each year, we look back and we're amazed. The Lord has provided. We've always been able to find the money for the pledge that we made, especially when we gave to God's church first. So one of our former ministers, Pastor David Dindy, said that he wanted the congregation to set a stretch goal for their pledge, and if they weren't able to meet it, that he would give all of their money back for the entire year. He said in 20 plus years of making that offering, he's never had anyone ask for it back, because God will provide if we give what is God's back to him. So I wondered if I had to stand up in front of the church and say, this is how much I give. Would I be proud of it? Or would I be embarrassed by it? And I'm not going to do it, so. What about you? If you're to look at your income and decide what percentage belongs to God for all your blessings, how would you respond? So Dan Pennington, who is the president of the Vale Health Foundation, and I have volunteered to be co-chairs of the Stewardship Committee. And so everyone in the church will be receiving a letter in the mail in the next week, and we're going to ask everyone in 2020, for a stretch pledge. We're going to ask for 20% in 2020, more than last year. And if everyone did just that, it would allow for us to do some really exciting things in this church. Many of you raised your hands a few weeks ago that you were involved in the early days of ERPC. So ERPC started out in Red Cliff, then Minturn, and then this was built. And it just seemed impossible to build this church, and it wouldn't have been possible without God's blessing. So currently the session is exploring how to get pastoral assistance, enhancing our youth, children, and young adults programs, and you'll be hearing more about what that looks like. But we're asking everyone to prayerfully consider their pledge for 2020 and see how God is working in you and in the church to take us to the next level of growth. Because we're at a critical stage where we need to walk in faith once again. And as Pastor Rob said about the 20% increase, he said, oh, it's bold. You may recall at the beginning that I said the Lord asks us all to step out in faith. That's what we're called to do. Pedal point number 3, go out in faith and good courage, knowing that God will provide. Here are the 3 points that we talked about. Jesus needs to be in the captain's seat of our bicycle, and we still need to pedal. Pedal point number 2, it's all Jesus' kingdom. When we give, we're giving his money to his church. And pedal point number 3, go out in faith and good courage, knowing that God will provide. My question is ERPC playing to win or playing not to lose? Are we playing to win or playing not to lose? I'm going to end with a poem. It's kind of a poem story, and I've searched on the internet trying to find out who wrote this, and everywhere I find it, it says unknown. It's called Life with Christ. When I first met Christ, it seemed as though life was rather like a bike ride, but it was a tandem bike, and I noticed that Christ was in the back helping me pedal. I don't know just when it was that he suggested we change places, but life has not been the same since. When I had control, I knew the way. It was rather boring, but predictable. It was the shortest distance between 2 points. But then he took the lead. He knew delightful long cuts, up mountains and through rocky places at breakneck speeds. It was all I could do to hang on. Even though it looked like madness, he said, pedal. I worried and was anxious and asked, where are you taking me? He laughed and didn't answer, and I started to learn to trust. I forgot my boring life and entered into the adventure. And when I'd say I'm scared, he'd lean back and touch my hand. He took me to people with gifts that I needed, gifts of healing, acceptance, and joy. He said, give the gifts away. They're extra baggage, too much weight. So I did. I gave them to the people we met. And I found that in giving, I received. And still, our burden was light. I did not trust him at first, in control of my life. I thought he'd wreck it. But he knows bike secrets, knows how to make it bend to take sharp corners, knows how to jump to clear high rocks, knows how to fly to shorten scary passages. And I'm learning to shut up and pedal in the strangest places. And I'm beginning to enjoy the view and the cool breeze on my face with my delightful, constant companion, Jesus Christ. And when I'm sure I just can't do any more, he just smiles and says, pedal. Amen.